It's really great to be back here at the Mineral Library. This is my favorite place to give talks. The facilities here are unmatched. And it's wonderful to look out here and know most all of you. And so thank you. I'm very happy with the turnout here. Considering what we just went through the last year or so, it's slow getting back after those Zoom presentations, and to see a good turnout here for the talk. I'm very appreciative that you folks came out. And I'm very curious as to how many of you even know of Jack Casement. So raise those hands. A lot of hands going up. Well, today we're going to fill in a lot of blanks. If you don't know that much about him, you're going to certainly know as much as I know at the end of this talk. So let's get started. He is a builder of railroads and a Civil War general. And yes, he's Ohio's Jack Casement, but more than anything, he is Painesville's Jack Casement. And we're going to start off with a description so you have an overview of the man. Jack stood just 5 feet 4 inches and weighed 140 pounds. His friend, General Jacob D. Cox, and you'll be seeing that name in this presentation quite a bit because they were very good friends. He described him as being rough of speech but generous of heart, running over with fun, as jolly a comrade and as loyal a subordinate as the Army could show. And another admirer just described him in one word: pugnacious. He opinionated, could get in your face, type A personality. A natural-born leader, he was a railroad contractor from his mid-20s until his early 70s. He worked his whole life. He is most remembered for laying the over 1,000 miles of track for the Union Pacific portion of the Transcontinental Railroad. And I hope I don't slip during the talk and say Transatlantic Railroad. I don't want you looking at the guy next to you saying, did we build a bridge over the Atlantic Ocean? Transcontinental Railroad. As a major and a colonel in the Civil War, he led his regiments from the front. Not all the colonels did, but he did. On the motivation to fight, I like this one. He wrote, "I am a little different from most of the officers. I am not fighting for glory. Consequently, I have nothing to stimulate me but action but duty." And by the end of the war, he was a brigadier general. He never went to West Point. He was a citizen general. And his story begins January 29th, 1829, and we're going to start in the British Isles there, the Isle of Man. Anybody know where the Isle of Man is offhand in the British Isles? Pretty hard to point out from here, so I'll help you. It's right there in the middle. He wasn't born yet when his family left there. In 1828, he was in his mommy's tummy. But he was the first one to be born in the United States. They already had 5 children. He is the firstborn in America, and he is the 6th of 10 children. And that they settled here in Geneva, New York. There's Buffalo, there's Rochester, there's Syracuse, so now you know where Geneva is. And and he was a farmer. And apparently he wasn't happy with the soil, and he heard that the soil in Michigan was very good. So many people were moving to Michigan in those days. And so he bought a farm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and started farming there. And tragically, he died just 3 years later. Jack's only 18 at the time. Now he's an adult. He's going to be a laborer on a Michigan Central Railroad. Now his mother's going to be left with 4 younger siblings, and most of the children are they're already adults. He goes to work on the Michigan Central Railroad, and that's his calling for life. He's going to learn to grade, to lay rails, to fill ballast. That's all the stones you see there keeping the tracks all together. And to drive spikes. He's going to learn the business. And then, in 1850, when the Western Michigan is complete, he comes up to Ohio because there's a lot of work in Ohio. First job he gets is with the CC and C Railroad. Do I have to tell you what that stands for? Probably not.
Chicago and Cincinnati.
Yes. Actually, yeah. Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. And he soon is made foreman, so he's rising in the ranks already. Afterwards, when that's complete, he's going to get a job with the CP&A. Anybody know what the CP&A stands for? Cleveland, Painesville, and Ashtabula. That's a Massas Stones Railroad. And later on, it'll be referred to as the Lakeshore Railroad. And then when that's complete after a couple of years, and there's just a year or two in between railroad building in this area, he runs a freight train between Cleveland and Buffalo. Now, whether he worked for somebody or whether he did it himself, I don't know, but he even learned the business that much better. Nobody could have learned those rails or knew those rails better than he. He goes into business himself as a contractor now. And he's going to bring his younger brother Dan into the company. Dan stayed in school after their father died. He learned accounting. He knew numbers, so he was very instrumental for his older brother's business. Now he's self-employed now. He's contracting with this company to repair and ballast the tracks. He knows how to do that. He's going to add side tracks, spurs, because this is getting so much volume, so much traffic that they already need 2 sets of tracks. And a lot of the small trestles, he gets rid of the small trestles and he fills in the ravines so it's a smooth, straight track. Now his work proceeds east. He goes through Painesville, and there's a famous story about how he met his future wife. He comes here to Calamity Curve in Painesville. It's the Grand River, how Route 20 goes underneath that bridge and goes out toward Perry and Madison. Story is he came up here with a wagon filled with supplies, and he had a crew working up there. And he got up there to the top and he looks around and says, "Where's my crew?" And he looks off this way, and here's the top of the hill that he's looking up. He's down there. And this could very well be the same pump because it's pretty old. He sees this beautiful young girl. It catches his eye. She's replenishing his crew with water from her family's well. Her family, let's talk about her family because she's in the story for the rest of the story. The Jennings family of Painesville. The father, Charles C. Jennings. He's a farmer. He's an educator. He's a member of the Lake County Board of Education. And at this time, he's also a state representative, and he is an avid leading abolitionist. He is a pillar of Painesville society and Lake County. Back a few years, in 1840, he bought 300 acres from an officer of the Connecticut Land Company, and his daughter Frances was born the same year, and she will be educated at Painesville Academy and Willoughby Female Seminary. Not a lot of the girls got educations. She got an education at both of those facilities there. So, courtship and wedding bells in the next year. And as you can see, he's 28, she's 17. You think, is she too young for a man like that? Well, 17 was good marrying age, is my understanding in those years. She's fully educated. Yeah, she's ready to be married. They're going to live with the family, though, with their parents, because he's never home. They're going to marry on October 14th, and she is going to get a nickname by her husband, Frank. And it was explained that he was gone so much that he joked that I could use a man's name since I was the head of the household. And that was what he called her for their marriage. Railroad widow, right off the bat, they will have 3 sons. Charles, named after her father, John, named after John Casement, and Dan. I'm guessing it would be John's brother. She will devote her energies to her family, and in later years, she's going to devote her energies to women's rights, and you'll see some slides on that. And so the Casements, they're busy. They're laying track all over the place. They happen to be in Pennsylvania at the time of Fort Sumter. So Dan Casement's going to manage the company going forward while older brother Jack goes off to war. And this is April 1861. If you wanted to join the war effort from Northeast Ohio, you joined the 7th OVI out of Cleveland. And they were 90-day units, but they quickly turned it into 3-year enlistments. They elected their own officers. A lot of you here know who those officers were. You had Tyler from Ravenna, who beat out in the election James A. Garfield, who was very disappointed not to get elected. You had this well-known character from Cleveland, came from a good-known family. He's a printer. He is elected lieutenant colonel. He's the number 2 ranking officer of this regiment of 1,000 men. Casement, he's already a proven leader. He's very popular with the men already. He is the major. And where do they get started at after their training and all that? Well, the action in the beginning of the war is Western Virginia. It is a civil war within a civil war. Those folks from Appalachia, they want nothing to do with the citizens in the war effort of Eastern Virginia, the plantation owners, the slave owners. They're not part of that group. They're loyal to the United States, and they let Lincoln and the people in Washington know that. So this is really where the war is going to get cranked up pretty quick. And this is where Jack Casement in the 7th Ohio will go to first, the Western Virginia campaign. And their first action will be in a place called Somerville. Okay, Cross Lanes, Somerville. They're the easternmost part of this effort here, and they're going to be surprised. They're only 1,000 men. They're going to be surprised by a brigade. Now, they're supposed to realize that there is a brigade out there of Confederates in the area, but Tyler, he makes no effort to take a defensive position that first night when they get there. He says, we'll sleep down here in this valley. Some of his officers are saying we should be up on the ridge. We know that there's Confederates within a few miles of here. Well, he says, well, we'll do all that tomorrow. So they go to sleep that night. The next morning, the Battle of Cross Lanes. See how they're outnumbered here? Well, they regroup as fast as they can, and they start getting out of there this way. Now, Tyler gets most of the men, and he gets them going this way. You can follow me here if you want, to a place called Gauley Bridge. That is the campaign headquarters of Jacob Dolson Cox. And Casement's men, they don't make it out with Tyler. They're trapped in here. But Casement gets them all together, and he takes them out this way. And they're going to follow the river for the next 3 days and end up in Charleston. Tyler doesn't know that. When he gets to Cox's headquarters with half of his crew, 2/3 of his crew, he thinks he's lost Casement and 400 men. When he finds out 3 days later that they're okay, you got to believe he was pretty happy about that. The 7th, they're going to lose 15 altogether. 40 are going to be wounded. 96 are missing. They are captured. Oberlin, Company C, lost, 40 men that were captured. In the early part of the war, you got paroled pretty quick. They were paroled a year later. So that was their first taste of the war. The second big taste, because there were little skirmishes between then and here in the spring of 1862, they are part of the effort against Stonewall Jackson. History calls it the Valley Campaign. Jackson has 15,000 men. His job is to keep as many Union men as he can in the valley and keep them away from Richmond. And he's outnumbered by 3-1. There's 3 different armies of 15,000 by the Union trying to catch this guy and bring him down. He keeps dividing his forces, and he keeps going after elements and details of different armies, and he's doing very well. Well, at one point he gets some information saying that there's a element of a regiment up here at a place called Kernstown, just south of Winchester. So a couple of regiments, so he's expecting about 6,000 men to be there that he's going to capture. So he takes a brigade of 3,000 men with him, and he gets to Kernstown. Well, let's read here. And he lines his 3,000 men up for battle, and then he sees what's coming at him. 9,000 men. It's too late. He's got to stay there. He turns to an aide and says, well, say nothing about it. We are in for it. He brings his men here to this area, which was probably the best defensive area. There's a ravine there and a stone wall. And here comes the Union folks this way, and there's more coming at them this way, and there's more if needed. Now, Tyler, who's in charge of a brigade now, sets his men up like this. He doesn't have a line like that. He puts them by regiment. He's going in there like a battering ram. This is brilliant, really. I haven't seen too many of this in Civil War history. Spotsylvania did it very effectively. Well, he did it here. And look what happens when the first one goes through, and they get it the hardest. But when they push through, followed by the second one, and these folks have already started retreating for their lives, the rest of these can roll up the lines. They just go push on the flanks here, and when you got this group coming in this way, Jackson didn't have a chance. Now you got to wonder about those folks that are in the front. They've got the hardest job. Well, it's the 7th OVI. It's Casement and his men. And their flag is going to end up with 28 holes. The staff is going to be cut in 2. And Casement's going to write to his wife, "Our regiment was in the worst of it and behaved most admirably. The cape to my coat is completely riddled with balls, but I was not touched, nor my horse." Isn't that amazing? And imagine the wife reading that. "And my cape is completely riddled with, bullet holes." But he was unscathed. As a result, he's performing very well during that summer. The Union Army needs capable commanders. There's a new regiment being formed on the west side of Cleveland called the 103rd OVI. He gets the command. He is now a colonel. He's no longer a major. He's a colonel of Ohio's newest OVI, the 103rd. The men are from Medina, Lorain, and Cuyahoga. This group of men were going to spend 1862 in Kentucky and 1863 in Tennessee and take part of the Knoxville campaign, the siege of Knoxville in 1863. They're with the Department of the Ohio. They're not with the Army of the Potomac that sees a lot of big battles. They're not with the Army of the Tennessee or the Cumberland, which saw a lot of big battles. The Army of the Ohio plays more of a support role. So they had plenty of skirmishes, plenty of casualties, but they were never in any of the really big battles in this period of time. Oh, but wait till 1864. Atlanta. Now they've been up here in Knoxville, and they come down here through Chattanooga to join Sherman's efforts against at first Johnston and then Hood. And it's all flanking maneuvers all the way down to Atlanta. And finally, Sherman pushes Hood out of Atlanta. And when Atlanta falls, Hood, John Bell Hood, here he is, he starts moving west. First he goes north, and then he moves west. He's going after Sherman's supply lines. He's got to get Sherman pulled out of Atlanta. This is the only way he can figure to do it. So he goes after his supply lines. He actually has Sherman coming after him at first. You'll see the blue line goes up from Atlanta. And then he ends up here when Hood ends up here. And Sherman finally says, well, I'm not going to keep on this wild goose chase. He changes his strategy at this point. He's going to split his army in 2. And we know what he does with one half of the army. He sends it to the Atlantic Ocean, and we're not going to talk about that. The other half, he's going to give to George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. He's going to give it to George Thomas. He says, you go up to Nashville, because if we lose Nashville, we're going to lose our supply line. And so he gets up there with his Army of the Cumberland. And he's supposed to get all other elements that Sherman's not taking with him to the Atlantic Ocean. Well, that includes the Army of the Ohio. But they get a later start, because at first they were going to join Sherman. And Sherman says, no, you better go up and help Thomas. And so Sherman is going this way. Well, here he is. Through Atlanta, he's going to go to the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean. Hood is over here by October 31st. And Atlanta was taken in the beginning of September. He's here. J.D. Cox and Casement's crew are here. And Schofield, he's the one in charge of the Department of the Ohio, Army of the Ohio. They're both heading up to Nashville together, side by side. And Hood's trying to get ahead of Schofield so he can do battle, because he outnumbers them 3-2. Schofield's doing everything he can to keep ahead of Hood. And up here at Spring Hill, Hood finally gets ahead of him by about a half a day. And he says, all right, we're going to get a good night's sleep. We're going to fight him tomorrow, and we're going to destroy him in detail, because he's a bigger army. That's what you mean when you say destroy him in detail. Well, these folks, Schofield gets up there, sees that Hood is there and blocking him, but he's not totally blocking him. His army is 600 yards off the Pike. this pike that goes up and down here. So they have to practically tiptoe around his army. We're talking 12,000 men. They got past Hood, and they got up to Franklin before Hood even found out. And when Hood found out the next day what had happened, oh, heads were going to roll. He was so upset with his army and his generals. They get up to Franklin. And when the Unionists get up to Franklin, they are dead tired. They've been marching forever. J.D. Cox, he took his command headquarters in a place called the Carter House. And he said, when I got there, I just hit the floor so I could get a few minutes of sleep. Schofield, who's in charge of everything, he has to find a way to get over this river. This river goes around Franklin. You can see the bottom part of Franklin here. The bridge that they have has already been destroyed. He's got to get pontoon boats set up. And that's going to take most of the day. And he's got Hood coming after him up this pike here. So he tells Cox, you take care of the army, you're the commandant of the line, I'll take care of the bridges. Well, he's an engineer, he's from West Point. Cox isn't an engineer, he's a fighting general and a very capable one. Schofield has all the confidence in the world in Cox, as the same Cox has all the confidence in Casement. And so as they've come up here during the night, they've had Wagner's division being their rear guard. And when they get to Franklin and start building their defenses, and Cox was in charge of this and did a brilliant job of building these defenses, these folks were to stay here as their rear guard when Hood came up. And Wagner is under orders, when they get here, you get back in line and we'll get the battle going. Wagner doesn't pull his men up. It's like he wants to win this himself. And so here comes the battle. Here's the pike. Now the men have pulled up. They've been overrun. They started out by firing into the rebels, wasting time, wasting ammunition. Then they just finally run because they don't get any orders to join the lines up here. So they just run for the lines, and there's a gap here. And that gap was there intentionally to let them get through there. Well, the Confederates are so close to these Union men that these folks on the line can't even fire yet until the Union folks get inside the line. And guess what? They're followed by, a lot of the Confederates. So you've got Confederates in here along with the Union fighters. These Union fighters that just got in there, they're running back here. And their officers are yelling, form at the rear, form lines, reform at the rear. And these young guys on the lines up here, they were brand new to battle because there were quite a few. They're hearing these orders, form lines at the rear. And they're turning to the guy next to them and says, are we supposed to go back there? And so a lot of these folks start running back with the others. And Casement and Cox are going crazy when they see what's going on. And they come up here and they're riding their horses up and down those lines. And they stay in line, we're not moving anywhere. You stay where you're at, fire on them, fire, here they come. And then finally, this gentleman here, General Obdyke from Warren, Ohio, that's where Cox was from. They've been friends. He was part of this division that was out here originally. He came up there hours ago so his men could get some sleep. And he's been under orders from Wagner, you get up there to that line when I order you to. Well, he never gets ordered to. Finally, he just makes the decision, I have to get up there. So he brings his brigade up here, plugs the line, turns the battle in a few minutes, plugs the line, and now all of these wonderful defenses that Cox has put together here, now they're repulsing all of the fire that's coming at them, all of the soldiers coming at them. What happened to the soldiers inside there, the Confederate soldiers? Well, if they're not dead, every single one of them got captured. You couldn't escape. They're stuck inside the Union lines. There were 700 of them. They were all captured. Now, all of this happened within about an hour, and it started at about 4 o'clock, so now we're talking about 5 o'clock. Hood is way back here about a mile or two on high elevation, and he's looking through his binoculars. And when he saw those lines up here, Wagner's rear lines come up through there, he thought they were these lines. He thought that Schofield's entire front line had collapsed. He kept sending his men to the front. He kept sending more and more waves of Confederates to go up against this impenetrable line now. And he just kept taking casualties and casualties and casualties. His officers are telling him, stop it, we're wasting our men. 6 generals did not make it through the battle. They were killed on the battlefield. This went on for hours, but Cox knew that they had it in control. He let Schofield know, because Schofield has now finished the pontoon boats. He lets him know that the battle is in hand. We have won the day. And that was around 7 p.m. So he lets Thomas know, who's up in Nashville. The enemy has been repulsed at all points with heavy loss, 5,000 to 6,000 men. That's actually an accurate statement. For him to estimate that, he's actually right. Our losses are not 1/10 that number. The numbers that day was 6,000 that Hood lost, and Schofield lost about 2,000. That's everybody. The Union men, there was 189 casualties, and that was mostly from Wagner's men who were left hanging out here. Hood lost nearly 2,000 dead on the battlefield. And so when Thomas finds out that they've won the battle, he says, good, come up here to Nashville. Cox tells Schofield, well, why don't we just stay here? We've got matters in hand. And Schofield agrees with him, but Schofield will obey orders. He says, no, let's get the men over the bridge. Let's get up to Nashville. So now they have 11 miles to march, and they'll get there the next morning. The next morning, Hood looks out, expecting to resume the battle, and the Union Army's gone. Well, he gets in his mind, oh, it's a victory. No, he got slaughtered there. He lost a lot of men. Doesn't matter. He's going to take his army up to Nashville and resume the battle. Well, now he's outnumbered 55,000 to 24,000. When he gets up to Nashville a day later or so, he knows he can't fight an offensive war, so he digs his trenches and his defenses. Doesn't matter. The battle resumes between Thomas and Hood. 2 weeks later, the weather was so bad they couldn't fight before then. And Thomas just had no trouble at all handling Hood. He ended up pushing that army all the way back to the Tennessee River. Hood said it was the first time he had ever seen a Confederate army just disintegrate before his very eyes during a battle. And so all efforts in the Western Theater now are won by the Union Army. That part of the battle, or that part of the war, is now over. Now it's just in the east with Grant and Sherman. Grant, you know what he does to Lee. Sherman does it just a few weeks later against Joe Johnston, who's now in charge, because Hood was removed from command after that fiasco in Tennessee. And Casement, when the war's over, he resigns his command rather early, before his units are mustered out. He's got plans already. He's going to return home, and he's going to pick up where he left off. He's going to go back to building railroads with his brother. And you wonder what his wife has to say about that. Because he's been gone for 4 years. Jack Casement had a way of saying, he liked to say this, I live in a Democratic household, but my wife generally outvotes me. So, turns out in May of 1865, the Casement Brothers are given the contract for the eastern portion of the transatlantic railway. And as for his leaving home again, Frances, she's not the least bit happy about it, but she is supportive. In over 7 years of marriage, Jack has been away for 5. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? We're talking about Garfield here. And it gets even worse. Tragedy strikes because they lose their son, Charlie. He's 4 years old. They're going to have 2 more that come thereafter, but right now she's childless, and he's going to be gone building railroads. Charlie is buried in the family plot in Painesville next to his parents, as all the children are. So we move on to the Transcontinental Railroad. It starts here for the Union Pacific right outside of Omaha. The Central Pacific starts here, it's outside of Sacramento. And after 4 years, they're going to find out that this is where they're going to meet. Jack is going to have a crew of 10,000 men. And these are the different jobs. Tie cutters and lumberjacks to supply all of those ties. Graders to grade the ground. They are as far as 200 miles in front of the track layers. They'll have 1,000 shop men, 450 track men, 350 taking care of the train and the trains, and 100 surveyors who are way out in front of everybody. It's a rolling city. 80 cars are built for bunks, dining, bakery, payroll car, butcher car, office, and armory. The construction trains themselves and wagons are 20 miles long, continuous, 20 miles. At the end of the track, the cry of down rang out every 30 seconds. This is how fast the track's being laid. Men pulled the rails off the wagons and put them in place for the gaugers, followed by spikers and bolters, and the road was being built. And again, they did 1,044 in 4 years, averaging 1 to 2 miles a day. Talk about hazardous duty. You know, a lot of these men just came from the Army. That's hazardous duty. Try working on the railroad. Daily death is so common an occurrence due to sickness, due to accidents, Indians, and a big part is alcohol. Alcohol-fueled gunplay. A photographer reported he had dinner with the Casement Brothers shortly before everything was finalized. He was credibly informed that 24 men had been killed in several camps in the last 25 days. And when a gang of, they called them miscreants, these are men behaving badly, they walked off the job. And they went to a Wyoming advance station that had, you know, arms and food and probably money. They destroyed property, they injured citizens, they might have even killed one or two. Jack, do you think he's going to call the sheriff? Think he's going to call the Army? He is the Army. He raises a squad, takes it right into the station, and the press said that he quickly handled the problem, and the Eastern papers reported that the scoundrels died with their boots on. Reporters went along. They were out there stationed, telegraphing all the time to the Eastern papers what was going on. Yes, the show Hell on Wheels, that's what it was called, Hell on Wheels. There was a city that moved alongside the men that really wasn't sanctioned by the railroad folks. They had food for the men. They could take care of the men's needs. Well, so could this Hell on Wheels. They had variety stores, shops, grog shops, as they described it, by day, and they had a tent that was 100 feet long and about 40 feet wide with a wooden platform floor for gambling, for the girls, for liquor, and it was by day they described, and it was open 24 hours a day. By day it was disgusting, by night it was dangerous, and almost everybody was dirty, filthy, with marks of the lowest vice. These are the people who run the city, not so much the people on the railroad. And at these average a murder a day. And it got so bad at one point that Casement was told to handle the problem, and he got that order from his boss, General Grenville Dodge, who's the chief engineer of the Union Pacific Railroad. Everything falls back to him. He's responsible for everything. He told Casement, clean it up. So Casement gets 2 companies of men, 200 men, armed, and they go to the city. And they're confronted by these vice leaders. And he tells them, we're shutting you down. We're cleaning this place up. We're going to get better people running it. I don't know what he told them. But he was spat on. He was jeered. His men were jeered. Casement turns to somebody who knows to follow his orders when he's ready. He says, and whatever he said it in a whisper. And the next thing you know, they opened fire on these men. I don't know if somebody on the other side, like the OK Corral, somebody fired a gun or not, but there was gunfire. Later, this official, Grenville Dodge, asked what happened. He was visiting Casement. Casement took him to a nearby hill full of fresh graves. He explained, they all died but bought peace. So he took care of that problem too. Indians. That was really probably their biggest problem because it never ended. The Pawnee Nation, they've accepted the white men's presence because in Nebraska, they were from eastern Nebraska. Well, the road's going west, isn't it? And when you go west, you've got the Arapaho, the Sioux, the Cheyenne, And they've never put up with the white men. Now, interestingly enough, the Indians are mostly interested in stealing animals, stealing the supplies. They love to go and ransack and take everything they can carry. But attacks happen quite often, especially the men who are way out in front, the graders and the surveyors. They're the ones that get slaughtered by entire squads. And occasionally you had the Indians attacking the tracks themselves. The surveyors and graders, they're the most vulnerable, and every man is required to carry firearms. They get through Nebraska. The following year, they're now in Wyoming. At that time, Wyoming was the Dakota Territory. Well, when they got to Wyoming, there's maybe 1,000 men living there, population. It quickly grows to 10,000 men, and this isn't the railroad men. These are settlers coming in. And they want to become a territory. And Jack Casement's probably one of the most popular figures in Wyoming. And they elect him to go to Washington to represent them because Washington has made them an official territory, the Wyoming Territory. So now Jack is getting a taste of politics. He's getting to know the people in Washington. And he spends a lot of time in New York too, because the Union Pacific's board of directors are out of New York. So this gives him time to get home and visit with his wife. In 1869, the women are given the right to vote in Wyoming, and I think a lot of you know that. And who gave them the right to vote? Well, the only ones allowed to vote are the men. Well, how do you get these men to vote to allow women to have the vote? Well, probably Jack was the one who explained this to them. They knew that if they gave women the right to vote, that would encourage more women to come to the territory. Basic common sense. And who really was behind that and pushed that hard? Would have been these two women here, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They take their cause to Wyoming. Frances is visiting in Wyoming. She's finally getting out to be with her husband and visit with her. And she meets these two women and they become fast friends. And as you know, Wyoming will become a state later, but you maybe didn't know that the women will continue to have the right to vote when Wyoming becomes a state in 1890. And Frances, she's out there with her husband and she's made some fast friends. Now, what really happened that she was allowed to go to Wyoming to be with her husband? It could be this letter that she wrote to Jack in October of 1868. She had not received word from her husband in over a month. So this is what she writes. I had about concluded that you had taken yourself off to China, but a dispatch tonight informs me that you are still this side of the ocean. And I should think, trying to see what you can do. 8 miles of track is a pretty big thing, I suppose. Jack has made national news. His crew laid 8 miles of track in one day, never been done before. I expect the reason you are not able to write to me once in a while is that you are bending all your energies to outdo everybody else and do the biggest thing that was ever heard of. Yes, he actually did. There are a few things that pay in this world, and I hope that is one of them. Well, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was. He made a lot of money doing this. And now it's a race to the finish. The Central Pacific is coming from the Pacific, and here comes the Union Pacific. And they're getting so close that now they know where they can set their meeting point at a place called Promontory Point. And the Central Pacific, in so doing, they broke Jack Casement's record of 8 miles in one day. They laid 10 miles in one day. The Union Pacific Casement's crew, they took their track all the way up to Promontory Point. And then the Central Pacific, they're about 20 miles to go. Well, they've planned this. And they're going to beat that record. And they did. They started at 12:01 a.m. and they finished at 11:59 p.m. and they laid 10 miles of track and broke Jack's record. It turns out the tracks were done so poorly that they had to be repaired later on, but they broke the record. Dan Casement was so upset with the Central Pacific that he told his brother, let's rip up our tracks and we're going to do it again and we're going to beat their record. Jack had to calm him down and said, no, we'll let them win. There was a $1,000 bet going on between Thomas Durant of the Union Pacific and Leland Stanford of the Central Pacific as to who was going to get there first. And Jack didn't want any part of the bet. He didn't want to waste his money. It could have been for the number of track in one day, but it was a $10,000 bet. He talked Durant into taking the bet against the Union Pacific, and he figured that Durant would take the bet because he knew Durant would never pay it. So now it's May 10th, 1869. Here we go. The laying of the installation of the Golden Spike. Now Leland Stanford was so dismayed by this picture that he commissioned this picture, much more dignified, to be painted. And the country knew when this golden spike was going to be pounded in. They had transmitters, they had the telegraph wired to the mall and to the spike. That when that was hit, that would go out across the country. It was like the moon landing. The whole country's glued to this. Well, Leland Stanford is going to miss the spike. But it doesn't matter because he still hit the rail further down. And so the word goes out that the golden spike has been driven in. So the country didn't know who really drove in the golden spike. When Leland wasn't going to make a fool out of himself again. Here's the story. And this is the source is American Heritage, February 1958 issue. And the guy who wrote it is this gentleman here, Lewis Beebe, publisher of the Territorial Enterprise, Virginia City, Nevada. When the gold spike itself was inserted in the hole prepared for it, President Leland Stanford of the Central Pacific took a mighty swipe at it with the official silver spike maul and missed by a generous margin. There was rude laughter among the numerous experts present. Vice President Thomas C. Durant of the Union Pacific likewise missed. A professional, General Jack Casement, head of construction for the Union Pacific, finally smote the spike home amidst the cheers from the paddies. And I had heard that he had actually done it, but I never saw any proof. It wasn't until I got some information for this talk. I got this from the Lake County Historical Society, and they gave me a copy of something that Jack Daniels had put together for one of his articles. People remember Jack Daniels, Lake County historian? He was the source of this paragraph right here. And when I saw American Heritage, February 1958, I scratched my head and I said, wait a minute, I probably have that at home. Because we used to get the American Heritage. My dad had them. Now I have them. Found it in a cabinet out in the garage, February 1958. And it's in here, talking about Jack Casement smoting. And that's the word they used. He smoted. Yeah, there it is. Finally smote the spike home. I never heard that word until I got ready for this. Has anybody heard that word before? Okay, so it is a real word. Jack Daniels didn't make it up, and neither did Lucius. Okay. Is it still there? Can you go there and see the Golden Spike location? Yes. The National Park Service has a place there for that moment. I do not believe these rails are still used, but the site is still there, of course. And that's how you would have done it. Leland Stanford missed it, and so does Tom Durant. But I gotta believe it had been a while since Casement swung a maul, but he nailed it, put it right in there. Does anybody remember this movie from 1939? It came out 70 years later. I guess it was a hit. But 1939 was a tough year to bring out a movie with Gone with the Wind and everything else that came out that year. Cecil B. DeMille's Union Pacific. Notice it's not Central Pacific. Union Pacific. That's the one he wanted to write about. Or that's the movie they wanted to do. Barbara Stanwyck and Joel McRae. And this gentleman here, Stanley Ridges, he played Jack Casement. I guess it was a well-received movie. Has anybody seen it? I remember trying to once on AMC, or is it TMC? Turner Movie Classics. It was so bad I couldn't watch more than 10 minutes of it. And I was going to watch it because I wanted to see if Casement, I mean, this was years ago, but I wanted to see if I could, if Casement had a prominent role. Well, the 10 minutes that I watched, he sure didn't. But they sure showed hell on wheels, so I think that was most of the movie from what I saw. So, the war is over, the building of the transcontinental is over. Lots of long separations between Jack and his wife. Well, he did come home whenever he could. He fathered 2 children by 1868, John and Dan. Frances would write, "Jack is a mighty smart boy." That's John. She wrote of her son John, "He talks of his papa, but poor child, he knows but little of him." And Jack responded in this one letter, "I am perfectly homesick. When this job is over, I think I would like to work in the garden or build a house." Build a house. Boy, that's a house. That's their house out in Paynesville. The Casement house. And Charles C. Jennings had a lot to do with the building of this house. He had the foundation started in 1868. And this foundation took 2 years to settle before they could start building the house. The first and second floors have identical floor plans. The home is ventilated by wooden ducts inside the walls, and they receive fresh air from under the porch. And many of the furnishings that were purchased by the Casements, they went to New York to get these furnishings. They're still in the house today. Water, gas heating, and lighting. Now, you folks that are familiar with the James A. Garfield site, they have a gravity-fed water system. So did the Casement house. It was upstairs in this building right behind the house, supplied the house with running water. Casement had 5 gas wells dug for heating and lighting. This is the last one. And it was reputedly the first in Northeast Ohio. And we're talking 1870, so I gotta believe it might be. Today, the gas wells are long gone, but the gas fireplaces are still in use. At least one is that I know of. There's another site there. Listed in 1979, the National Register of Historic Places. And of course, it's got a historic marker in front, built by, designed by Charles W. Hurd, the son-in-law and student of Western Reserve master builder Jonathan Goldsmith. It's an excellent example of the Italianate style, and it was in the Casement family until 1953. We'll talk about that. So Jack's home now. Oh, he has another job here now and then, maybe building a railroad, a small job, but he's home now. And he has a wide range of interest, and he has money. In 1871, he becomes the trustee and financial supporter of Lake Erie College. Charles Hurd, who built his house, also built this house, the seminary there. He also drilled the first gas wells on the campus to supply heat and light for College Hall. In 1872, this comes out of nowhere really, he gets elected to the Ohio State Senate, representing Lake, Geauga, and Ashtabula counties. That's the seat that Garfield held back in 1858. Now he has it for 2 years. I couldn't find anything of what his accomplishments were, any stories about going down to Columbus and how he got along. But he was a state senator for 2 years. He's got the politics bug, it's bit him. He also becomes an investor, a serious investor. He partners with J.D. Cox's brother Kenyon. Kenyon's a younger brother of Cox. And they have an investment firm in New York. And in 1863, there's such a thing called the Panic of 1873, and it created havoc for a lot of people, a lot of investors. And it hit his railroad investment. And now creditors are coming after the railroad that he's part owner of. So he talks Jacob Cox to become the president to ease the concerns of a lot of the creditors. And he and Kenyon, they become directors of the railroad. And so Jacob Cox, he's very experienced and able, and he's been a lawyer also, so he handles it beautifully, but he can only do so much. After a couple of years, he steers the company for 2 years before selling out to another group who then sells out to Jay Gould. So they do get out from underneath it. They don't lose that much, but they did get out of it. You hear a lot about the Civil War reunions. Well, General Jack hosted a reunion for 300 veterans at his home on July 3rd, July 4th, 1874. So yeah, he's a state senator at this time. He's throwing this big party for the 7th, the 103rd, and the 29th. Now, why the 29th? Well, they were joined at the hip with the 7th. They served together the whole war. So, everybody knew each other. So, of course, he invited them too. Garfield was a featured speaker at Painesville's 4th of July ceremony. They say there was an estimated 10,000 people that attended Garfield's speech for the 4th of July. In fact, Garfield wrote this in his diary. On July 3rd, in the evening, went with the Steeles. You've heard of the Steele Mansion? Well, this was his brother Horace Steele. Went with the Steeles to General Casement's, where there was a large party of soldiers. In his entry on July 4th, slept until a late hour, made only the slightest preparation for a speech. That Garfield was always like that. He could just impromptu get up there and make the greatest speech you ever heard. Said, at 11 a.m. I spoke for 40 minutes and did better than I expected to. I can't imagine speaking in front of 10,000 people and not be prepared and do a great job. One of the members of the 103rd recalled, we had a big time. On the evening of July 3rd, the colonel spread a splendid banquet. And this was followed by a dance in his front yard. The next day, the comrades took part in the celebration of the day and listened to a fine address by General James A. Garfield, marching to and from the place of speaking. As Colonel Casement could not furnish beds for all present, of course he couldn't. The comrades slept on the floors in the house, on the porches, in the barns, and on the lawn in tents. I would have been happy with the tent. And speaking of the 103rd and their annual reunions, I don't know how many regiments there were in the Union Army. The 103rd was the first to hold a reunion. It was just the following year. And they began holding unions annually, every year. They had so much fun in 1866, they said, that does it. We're going to be doing this every year going forward. And in 1907, they incorporated and bought 4.5 acres of lakefront in Sheffield Lake. And they built these barracks, and they're still there today. There they are. I've been there a couple of times, and I'm sure some of you have too. In 1876, Casement still has the political bug. And he's very involved with state politics. And he must have got talked into this. Now, the Republican Party at that time was not at all cohesive. They were split into two sections, the liberals and the conservatives. The liberal faction talked Casement into running against the Garfield. And how did he do? Well, he was a little bit out of his element, I think. The Cleveland Leader in September had this editorial, the election of Jack would spoil a first-rate railroad track layer in order to make a very poor congressman. Hey, it's politics now. You're not a hero when you're, And so he did give Garfield his toughest race in Garfield's 9 campaigns. But look how much he lost by. It's a 2-to-1 margin, 20,012 to 11,349. And that's as close as anybody got to beating Garfield. Garfield's very safe in his seat. And what is his relationship with Garfield? I wanted to answer this question. I tried to answer this question, and I have an answer. It's hard to say. It really is. Here's a diary entry from July 8, 1879, Garfield's diary entry. Dr. Robinson came, and we drove to Dr. Streeter's farm in Perry. Dr. Robinson lived right up the street here from the library. Home via Casements, where we stopped to look at his barn and stock. He has manifestly changed his opinion, clearly changed his opinion. He has clearly changed his opinion of me during recent years, or his earlier ones were matters of political convenience. So he's figuring it both ways. Maybe he's changed his opinion, or maybe he always had the same opinion of me, but he had to give his political convenience. And where did that visit come from? Maybe it came from this dispatch that Casement sent to Garfield just 2 weeks earlier. Dear sir, I am in receipt of your last magnificent speech in Congress. Please accept my thanks for the compliment, yours truly. Don't know what the compliment was. If that is indeed the word compliment, I'm transcribing this. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. This is 11 days after the election. Casement is in a very jubilant mood. Dear General, I will no longer permit the fear of being misunderstood by you. Now that speaks volumes. To stand in the way of obeying my impulse to offer you my hearty congratulations upon your election to the grand office of the United States of America, and express hope that your administration will be so just and beneficial that we will all insist upon your holding the office for 8 years. Casement calls on President-elect Garfield at Lawnfield, like everybody did. This happened on February 11th. What did Garfield have to say with that in his diary entry? General Casement and ladies from Painesville called. I guess they were just calling. There was nothing discussed politically. I mean, Senator Logan came from Illinois. He was a very top-ranked Republican. They talked for hours about political appointments for the cabinet. He was pushing for Robert Lincoln to be the Secretary of War, and Robert Lincoln became the Secretary of War. And the last one, Casement writes a letter the next day to Garfield. As is possible, you may appoint Judge Swain from Michigan, and I don't know what the appointment is for. It occurs to me that in the push and scramble by ambitious men that our modest, capable, and loyal friend J.D. Cox might be overlooked. I would not trouble you to read this, only I fear you might not think of it until too late. I have not spoken with the general upon the subject, but have reason for believing that the appointment would be agreeable to him, as his acceptance would be to the country. Cox had been to Garfield's about a month earlier, and he met with him for 5 hours, advising him and talking over things. But nothing became of this request, and nothing became of J.D. Cox's conversation with Garfield. Garfield is so wrapped up in national events, he's not a state event guy anymore. National events, he's really with the big boys now. He's got to let go of Cox and Casement, at least right now, while he gets ready to become president and get his presidency going. Here's speaking of sociable Casement, this is the class of 1893 with some Lake County girls, Lake Erie girls. There's a Margaret Kilbourne here. You're familiar with the statue in Painesville. The model of that was J.D. Kilbourne, Captain J.D. Kilbourne. He became a successful businessman in Painesville afterwards. I have every reason to believe that's his daughter right there. You see a Clara Hitchcock there. Got to be from the Hitchcocks, speaking of which. There's Jack, there's his wife. There's Peter Hitchcock. There's a gathering of Painesville society out in King Memorial Road on the way to Chardon. And that's not his house. It's probably the house that his grandfather or father built years before. He continues building into the 80s and 90s. He just can't get it out of his blood. And it's, for him, easy money. And look at the different roads he does. Then he does this one in Costa Rica. The 1890s got hit just like the 1870s did. And between his philanthropies and the Panic of 1893, he's lost a lot of money. So he takes his job in Costa Rica. I guess America's filled with roads by now. There's no real jobs. He has to build a road from central of this country out here. This is the Banana Republic, you know. And this is where they grow the bananas, and it's so hard to get them out to the coast that they had a railroad built. Now, there was another one built up here earlier. He built this one. Maybe he thought it was going to take 2 or 3 years. My gosh, it took 6 years. He was 68 years old when he took this on. And he finished in 1903. Frances joined her husband for the 6-year adventure. She was there quite a bit. During their absence, they had some neighbors take care of their house. During their absence, the front porch was enlarged. A porte-cochere was built on the side of the house. An 8-stone gate post inscribed with Jennings Place were built on the site. And here is everything here. That says Jennings Place. There's 8 of these. There's only 4 left today. You can see how the porch has been extended so you can come out the side and out to the backyard. And there's the porte-cochere. 1906, he goes out to San Francisco. Well, the San Francisco area for a railroad convention. April of 1906. Oh my, he's in San Jose. San Fran is 48 miles north. 4 o'clock in the morning, the earthquake hits. Of course, he's asleep in his bed. Ceiling just crashes down on him and everybody else that's in the place. He's able to dig his way out. He suffers a collapsed lung and broken ribs. A lot of others weren't that lucky. A lot of people died in that hotel. That's the way it looked beforehand, that's the way it looked afterwards. He never fully recovered from his injuries. Following year, he has his 50th wedding anniversary, and they had 200 friends attend the open house. There they are as a young married couple, and here they are at that time. And in December of 1909, feeling ill, Jack took to his bed. He died just 3 days later of pneumonia. And of course, it was big news. Relatives, friends, and former comrades gathered to look their last upon his face. The rooms and halls of the Casement residence were filled to overflowing. The Pratt-Smith quartet sang, "Nearer, My God, to Thee." At the head of the casket rested the tattered battle flag of the 103rd. Pallbearers included George P. Steele and James R. Garfield. I've got the right middle initial there. That's James Garfield's son, James Rudolph. And they probably knew each other very well from Lake Erie College because they were both very much involved with Lake Erie College. The parting words by his friend Judge Burroughs. He seemed to delight in gathering money in order that he might scatter it with both hands. The man was a philanthropist. Dan Casement, his last son, stated that statement, this one here, seemed to perfectly epitomize a single facet only of the general's many-sided, great-hearted character. And it was quoted in the paper, "In the blowing blast of a December blizzard, he was borne to his last resting place by a faithful group of his old soldiers." So his wife carries on for 20 more years. In 1883, she had organized the Equal Rights Organization of Painesville, served as president of the Ohio Women's Suffrage Association. In 1885, Susan B. Anthony visited for an entire week, and they went all over to the fine homes of Lake County while they conducted parlor talks to educate Lake County's women on the right to the ballot. Frances will live on to see the 19th Amendment adopted in 1920. And she will be lost in 1928. And they are still remembered at Lake Erie College. He's in the social parlor. There's his portrait there, Jack Casement. There is a display case as you walk into the social parlor that has some of the fine women from Lake Erie College. And there she is, topping the bill about her role in Lake County and Lake Erie College. Now, you think that would be enough of making newspaper headlines. In 1943, Jack Casement makes the headlines again in a Painesville Telegraph. A ship is going to be named after him, a Liberty ship for World War II. And that's what it looks like. And so the Casement House today, well, when Charles Jennings died in 1875, the title did not pass on to Jack Casement or even to his daughter, Frances Casement. The title said that it was going to be Frances's home until, for the rest of her life, but title goes to his two living grandsons, John and Dan. John died in 1888, so this is Dan Dillon's Casement's home until he dies in 1953, at which point it was sold to the R.W. Sidley family. And today it is used as the corporate headquarters for the family business. I work there. My brother works there. There I am giving a tour a couple of years ago to the fine young ladies of Lake Erie College. And if you'd like to go in and take a tour, we're going to go through this front door right here, okay? There's the front entry hall as you walk into and then if you see that back area there of the entry hall, if you're standing there, now you're standing there, you can see this way to the front entry hall. We're going to go up the stairs. That's the first landing there. We're going to go walk along the landing so you can get another look here at the beautiful rail there. And now let's take a look up here. First floor and the second floor design is the same. Here is the library. This is the president's office today. the executive assistant to the president. Beautiful fireplace there. You'll see a picture up here on the mantle, a gift from Garfield to Casement. That's another view of the library. You can see the books there. Most of those books are from the Casement family. This is of course, the drawing room, the parlor. This is our conference room. And you can see the beautiful chandelier and ceiling. And this is what it looked like back in the day. Same chandelier, same ceiling. My closing statement is this. In my opinion, Jennings Place is the foremost diversified historic property in Lake County. I'm setting it aside from Lawnfield. That's pretty specific in why it's so famous. It is the home of a president. This is diversified. Look at all the reasons why it's famous. Home of a Civil War general, abolitionist leader, a woman's suffrage leader, and this is where it gets its national, the man who smote the golden spike. The 300 acres that was purchased in 1840 still remain. All 300 acres. And just 2 families have owned the property in 180 years. That's a pretty special place, the Jennings Place in Paynesville. I want to say thank you to these folks here. Lake Erie College, Jenna Persis, Dr. Kathleen Delavan, Lake County History Center, Vicki Rob, who helped me with a lot of attachments here. James A. Garfield National Historic Site, Todd Arrington. It was his idea that I do this, so I'll give him a plug. Mary Lintern. I'll give you Mary Lintern right here. And R.W. Sidley, he's a legend, Bob Sidley, 86 years old. When his father died in 1961, R.W. Sidley, who started the company, Bob took over at the age of 26. In 1961, he is still our chairman today. And he's given me a lot of advice over the years. And I've got to thank him too. So thank you for coming. You've been a great audience.